People are coming in. Aloha, everyone. On behalf of the state's Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, welcome and thank you for joining us for this Pathways to Recovery webinar covering the topic of consumer protection related to the Maui wildfires relief support. The intention of today's webinar is to provide you with up-to-date information from our partners, including the Office of Consumer Protection and the Hawaii Housing Finance and Development Corporation, and to answer your questions. Please note that the information provided may be current as of today, September 21st, 2023. We will go through the questions that have been submitted to us in advance and answer as many as we can. Please note that due to the volume of questions received, we may run out of time before we've had a chance to address all of them during the webinar. We will do our best to get the answers, which will be posted online along with the webinar recording. If you have questions during this webinar, please submit them via the Q&A function within the Zoom platform to ensure that your question is received. And with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Joining us today, we have Mana Moriarty, Executive Director of the Office of Consumer Protection, Dean Minakami, Interim Executive Director of the Hawaii Housing Finance and Development Corporation, James Kunane Tokioka, Director of the Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism, and Dane Wicker, Deputy Director of the Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism. I will now turn it over to Director Tokioka for some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Lacey. Thank you all for attending, and especially to the panelists who are going to be answering questions for all of you. As we said in the last webinar, the biggest help that we can be to the community is communicating the things that are happening and trying to answer as many questions to many of the survivors that are struggling with in this situation. It's questions from the DCCA about housing and rental assistance and the do's and don'ts of what landlords and tenants' rights are. So I'm going to turn it over to the experts because we want to try to get as many questions answered as possible. So once again, thank you for joining us, and thank you for sending your questions in advance. Aloha. Back to you, Lacey.
Okay, thank you so much. So first off, we'll begin with Mana Moriarty from the Office of Consumer Protection for some updates. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lacey. And many thanks for the support from Hawaii residents. The reason that we're here today and able to serve the public, and the logistical support from Director Tokioka and his team that make a forum like this available to engage directly with Maui survivors. Thank you to Dean Minakami as well. Governor Josh Green, who appointed Director Tokioka, also appointed my direct boss, Nadine Ando, to the position of Director of Commerce and Consumer Affairs. Like Director Tokioka's position, Director Ando's position is a cabinet level appointment. I am the Executive Director of the Office of Consumer Protection. My position is responsible for day-to-day operations of the Office of Consumer Protection. And the Office of Consumer Protection is one of 3 primary public-facing divisions of the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs. The opinions that I'm providing today are my own opinions. They might not represent the opinions of the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs or its director or perhaps the governor. Pathways to Recovery, this forum is a great opportunity for us. The Office of Consumer Protection, as relevant to our discussion today, provides information to the public about the main law that governs residential landlord-tenant relations, the Residential Landlord-Tenant Code, Chapter 521, Hawaii Revised Statutes. Our office does not provide legal advice to callers. It does not advocate interpretations of the Landlord-Tenant Code. If you're looking for opinions or advocacy, our office can refer you to other resources because that is not what we provide. Hopefully, from the questions that we get today, I will be able to provide important feedback to my bosses who can in turn formulate policy decisions and help Maui survivors. I also like to think that I will hopefully be able to provide some relevant information about landlord-tenant questions. Our office is an enforcement agency. We investigate suspected or reported violations of statutes enacted for protecting consumers. We have specific powers to enforce consumer protection laws and the provisions of the emergency proclamation related to it. One limitation, I am not the consumer advocate, and I'm not a representative of the Consumer Advocate's office. So although the names Consumer Advocate and Office of Consumer Protection are very similar, we do different things. The Consumer Advocate assists utility consumers, and the Office of Consumer Protection primarily assists consumers who purchase goods or services for household or personal use. In answer to one of the advanced questions that we received, I'll try and identify some publicly available information that the Consumer Advocate has put out there for people to use as a resource. The Office of Consumer Protection fields calls on landlord-tenant matters, whether it's an emergency in the state or not, and our call center operators have studied the relevant emergency proclamations. They can provide you information that's about what the law says that may be relevant to your situation. So one joke that I've heard about our office is that when tenants don't hear what they want to hear from our office, they tell us that we're in favor of the landlords and they hang up. And when landlords call our office and they don't hear what they want to hear, they say that we're biased in favor of the tenants and they hang up. So we are trying to provide information and not advocacy for one or the other. Aubrey, if you could call up the contact information for the Office of Consumer Protection and our Landlord-Tenant Information Center. This is a resource. The Landlord-Tenant Information Center is a resource that's available for the public. You'll see 3 phone numbers listed there. We have an employee in Wailuku, an employee in Hilo, and an employee in Honolulu who actively field calls about landlord-tenant matters from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. each day. Calls not answered are returned on the next business day. If for any reason you don't get through, please leave a message and you do get a call back on the next business day. Since August 9th, our OCP staff have answered over 100 calls from the public that are logged as landlord-tenant matters that are related to these wildfires. So jumping into the substance a little bit, on August 9th, while Governor Josh Green was traveling out of state, Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke signed the 2nd and 3rd proclamations relating to wildfires. These proclamations included provisions declaring that rental prices for residential dwelling units may not be increased for the island of Maui. These rent freeze provisions they continue to apply today to residential tenancies for the entire island of Maui, not just the west side of Maui. The rent freeze is part of the price freeze, which came into effect by operation of law when the emergency was declared. I'll come back to that price freeze in a moment. Not only is there a prohibition on increasing rents, but by operation of law, restrictions on landlords' ability to terminate a residential tenancy automatically came into effect with that second emergency proclamation. Those provisions prohibit landlords from terminating residential tenancies except for in three narrow circumstances: a material breach of the lease, the owner sells the residence, or the landlord or their immediate family moves into the unit. Fast forward to today, and that status quo that was put in place on August 9th remains in place with one big change. Today, landlords can continue to terminate for a material breach of the lease, with one caveat: a landlord cannot terminate a tenancy for non-payment of rent. That's a big caveat, and I'm sure we'll spend time discussing that today in response to questions. Beginning on August 19th, Governor Green prohibited commencement, continuation, or prosecution of summary possession actions for non-payment of rent in the courts on Maui. What does this mean? During the emergency, if a tenant doesn't pay their landlord rent when due, the landlord cannot get a court order terminating the tenancy that results in possession going back to the landlord. If a landlord threatens a tenant with eviction for non-payment of rent, that threat cannot be backed up by a court order. Now, these restrictions remain in place until November 6th, or until the governor suspends them or extends them. So the situation is fluid. Now, what if a landlord or a tenant engages in conduct that violates consumer protection laws or the emergency proclamation? As I mentioned, Office of Consumer Protection is a law enforcement agency. If you have information about a violation occurring, you should contact our agency. The contact information can be shared again, and it's available for whoever needs it. Landlords or others who violate these consumer protection laws or the emergency proclamation are subject to civil penalties of $500 to $10,000 per violation. Each day that the conduct continues constitutes a separate violation. Landlords can avoid prosecution if their violation was unintentional, and if, when confronted, they cease the unlawful conduct and provide restitution to anyone who is affected by that unlawful conduct. One last thing to mention before I hand the mic back to Lacey to begin a Q&A. The seventh proclamation issued on September 9th contains a scaled back price freeze that applies to 14 designated items. The price freeze means that prices cannot exceed the prices that were in place on August 9th. Any violation of the price freeze is also subject to civil penalties. One of the items on the price freeze list is rental of residential dwellings. Another one is prices for units in a self-storage facility. If you would like to rent out your unit to a displaced family and you need to store your personal items in a self-storage facility, the price freeze applies and prices cannot be increased over the level that they were at August 9th. With that, I can pass it back to Lacey.
Okay, thank you so much. And before we start answering questions, I'd like to turn it over to Dean Minakami from HHFDC.
Thanks, Lacey. Good afternoon, everyone. At the last webinar, I gave an overview of the Hawaii Fire Relief Housing Program. So I won't go into detail this time, but I will just note that the objective of that program is to match property owners who have either a unit or room, an ADU, any type of accommodation, and to make it available to those who are survivors of the fires. And about 300 persons have found housing through this program, but there still are many units available, and it's across the state. Right now, we have 637 units available across the state, including 314 on Maui, 220 in Honolulu, 79 on Hawaii Island and 6 on Kauai. And unfortunately, this program does not provide financial assistance. We don't provide rental assistance to the survivors or guarantee rent to the landlords. But FEMA does have programs though that does this. FEMA has the rental assistance program, by which FEMA will pay, fair market rent for the survivor to rent a unit. So if you are looking, if you need rental assistance, then I would encourage you to sign up with FEMA for the rental assistance program. And I'm not sure if there's any property owners on here, but FEMA also has a direct lease program, which we are working with FEMA to get property owners to sign up for that program, because in the direct lease program, FEMA leases units directly from property managers, and they will house survivors in those units. So those are the longer term housing options that are available. Okay. Thank you, Lacey.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go into the questions. And the first question we have is for Mana with the Office of Consumer Protection. It states, my restaurant is on Front Street and my landlord is demanding rent or he will evict me. I cannot pay this right now as my business is shut down. What can I do?
My apologies. I'm sure I'll get it soon. I'll unmute myself appropriately. But as I had mentioned earlier in the presentation, raising rents for residential dwellings is prohibited and has been prohibited since August 9th. So what the person is saying could constitute a violation of the emergency proclamation. I would encourage that person to contact our landlord-tenant information center to provide specific information about their situation.
Okay, thank you so much. And this next question is for Director Tokioka. The question is, what is being done to help small local businesses who were impacted by the fires who work in the tourism industry?
Thank you for that question, Lacey. So the governor appropriated $12.5 million to Maui County to help businesses. And so we're working out the details as far as how that money is going to be dispersed. We're working that situation out with the Maui County. We've also been in communication with Maui Economic Opportunity, but it's not as easy as people think. There's also whether we're going to forego the tax on our end. We're trying to do that. We're in conversations with that, and we're trying to do the same with the federal government so that people know exactly what the terms of the forgivable loan is. We hope to get that finalized real soon, because we know businesses are struggling, but there's a lot of verification that needs to be done. And we're going to have to work through that process really, really fast. So that's the update on that. And as soon as we know more, we're going to get that out via press releases, because I'm not sure we're going to be, well, I'm hopeful that before the next webinar, we're going to have those details. And we've been in conversations with our Director of Finance and Budget and Finance and Maui's as well. So thank you for that question, Lacey.
Okay, thank you. The next question is for Mana, and it says, is the county or state able to implement landlord-tenant protections for businesses that are impacted indirectly by the fires?
Thanks, Lacey, for the question. I think this one might be better addressed by another agency. Our office deals with the residential landlord-tenant code, and it does not extend to businesses.
Okay, and I think the next question is also for Mana, and it says, where in the proclamation regarding non-payment of rent and eviction excludes new leases, can the verbiage be modified so those of us trying to get a new place to live won't be included? Landlords are hesitant to rent with the proclamation worded for any all leases agreements, even new ones.
This is a really good question, and I would be curious to what my colleagues think about it as well. I can answer whether the restriction on non-payment of rents applies to leases after August 9th. It does. So if you enter into a lease after August 9th, the restriction prohibiting you evicting for non-payment of rent is in full force and effect. Now, I can understand the thinking that this is perhaps problematic for landlords who want to put their units on the rental market and are concerned about getting a bad tenant. So one thing we can discuss is what are the landlord's remedies for having a bad tenant? Under the proclamation, I mentioned that there are 3 circumstances in which a landlord can continue to evict tenants. One is for a material breach of the lease. One is if the landlord or their immediate family intends to move into the unit. I want to focus on this concept of material breach of lease for a moment, because with the exception of non-payment of rent, you can imagine bad conduct or misconduct by tenants, and what is the landlord to do when that happens? Well, if it arises to the level of a material breach of the lease, you can still file an eviction proceeding and obtain summary possession. So some examples of conduct that should cause landlords or tenants to stop and think is breaking the house rules. Could be something like damaging the property or committing crimes on the property. Those type of conduct should still be, able to be remedied even under the restrictions that are in place under the emergency proclamation. I'm curious how this particular effect of the emergency proclamation impacts Director Minakami's list and the availability of units on the list, or the willingness of landlords and tenants to enter into agreements to rent out properties.
Okay, thank you so much. And this next question, I think we're going to direct to Deputy Director Wicker. The question is, how is DBEDT economically developing all of Hawaii to become more self-sustainable, to reduce our dependency on tourism and importing of food?
Thank you, Lacey. So DBEDT is currently working with a few of our attached agencies, the Agribusiness Development Corporation, the Hawaii Technology Development Corporation, and the Creative Industries Division, to diversify our economy and looking at ways to decrease the import of food. There's a cost to that. When you look at the energy sector, for example, as we move to alternative sources for solar, wind, and geothermal, it requires land, infrastructure, facilities, and labor. Similarly, this is a situation with agriculture. The purchasing of agricultural land, development of infrastructure and facilities, all come at a cost. So we are looking at this model of we got to generate revenues to help pay for these costs. And DBEDT is working with Agribusiness Development Corporation to establish value-added product innovation centers across the state, 2 on Hawaii Island, 2 for Maui County, 1 on Oahu, and 1 on Kauai, to help scale up existing small business cottage industries or create new cottage industries. The goal here is to increase our exports, which will generate revenues that we can reinvest back into the agricultural sector, increasing the purchasing of more ag land, helping farmers with costs for irrigation, as well as facilities. And that would help lowering or reducing imports as we seek to grow more of our local product. That's one way to diversify away from um, the reliance on the visitor industry, but also to help decrease the imports of food. I mentioned a few other sectors earlier about the diversification, specifically to Maui. We're working with the Hawaii Technology Development Corp to set up an aerospace program and working with the Maui Research Tech Campus and all the efforts that are currently going on there. For tech and innovation, again with HTDC, there's a gap with local businesses that can compete for high federal contracts. We're looking at a pipeline and facilities to create small businesses there that can compete for those contracts. And then creative industries with our local students coming out in creative industry and film and making sure they have the facilities to produce and write and film their productions here. So that's it in a nutshell what we're doing to diversify.
Okay, thank you so much.
Lacey, if I can just add to that, Deputy Director Wicker and I were on Maui at Maui Economic Opportunity, and we were amazed at the programs that they have there right now in aerospace and how they were connecting with the local high schools and the Maui University to get people into that field. And right off the start, a lot of local kids are making, you know, a good salary in those programs. So it's something that we really want to continue to support. And most of that industry is on Maui Island, which is a good thing. And hopefully some of the people that were affected by the fires can get into that field with the training that's going to be available through a Maui Economic Development Board. So just wanted to add to that. I wanted to go back to the question about rental assistance for commercial. FEMA does not do support for businesses in their programs, and that's why the governor wanted to stand up this assistance for small businesses and coming up with the details, because some of the concern is that we're going to give forgivable loans to individual businesses and they're not going to keep their business in Hawaii. They may be moving. So there's all these different things that we need to do, but we're, as soon as we possibly can, we're going to get the funds to the businesses who want to stay and show a commitment to being in Maui and Hawaii. So just wanted to follow up with that question to some of the comments that came in.
Okay, thank you so much. This next question is for Mana, and it's how are you protecting or representing consumer interests for the people in working with Hawaii Public Utilities Commission? The current status quo is not working, and the underfunding of essential state departments to regulate bad actors while others get pay increases can no longer be the excuses for the of duty for the residents of Hawaii. With the strain of resource demand in addition to our unaffordable housing crisis, where are the protections being created even with a surplus of funds for this fiscal year?
So this is an interesting question. I think it goes back to my earlier comment about the consumer advocate who is charged by statute with assisting utility consumers. I did speak with the consumer advocate, my colleague, and he directed me to some resources that are available on their website. And Aubrey, if you could share those website, share screen, and perhaps put a link out there. So what you'll see on this website is a list of resources. Aubrey, it's the other page. If you click on the other tab, that's the website that the consumer advocate has put out, which includes resources for utility assistance and rental assistance. And it's an excellent page that I encourage anyone who is seeking assistance with utility payments or rent payments to visit. And there are other resources on there as well. Beyond that, beyond the information that's here, I do not have the expertise to comment on the consumer advocate's role in advocating before the Public Utilities Commission.
Okay, thank you so much. The next question is for Dean with HHFDC. In going through the draft presented by the board on affordable home ownership revolving fund program, it's a multi-part question. So with so much historical corruption in the area, what are the steps being put in place for accountability and transparency? Are you willing to go back to the drawing table to develop plans and working with each of the islands and their respective representatives?
Well, in terms of the question about, I guess, there being misuse of funds or corruption, I'm not aware of any such that taking place. So if this person does have documentation of this, then please send it to me because I would be very interested in hearing about it. In terms of working with the community, just to make clear that for Lahaina, HFDC and the state in general does not have any plans on rebuilding in Lahaina. We've made it very clear that it is the county will set the lead on where rebuilding occurs, what will be rebuilt, and when rebuilding will occur. And the state and FEMA are here to assist the county in their efforts. So again, HHFDC, I can tell you, does not have any specific plans right now to rebuild in Lahaina. And we are just here to support the county's decisions that they make.
Okay, great, thank you. This next question is for Mana, and it says, can the landlord kick you out because a survivor temporarily staying with you smokes outside away from the house? I've heard more and more people started smoking again or smoke more because it helps them to cope with anxiety, pain, suffering, frustration that came from the aftermath of the fires.
Thanks for the question, Lacey. This is a question that really gets at a very specific issue for this person. It's the kind of issue that our call center specialists at the Landlord-Tenant Information Center deal with on a regular basis. From the details provided, I can't necessarily provide an opinion, but I would encourage this person and anyone who has a particular situation that they have questions about to contact our Landlord-Tenant Center information specialists, and they can walk through the specifics of your situation with you.
Thank you. The next question is for Dean. It says, in order to qualify for long-term 12 to 18 months of rental assistance, can I rent from any landlord or only one whose property is listed with the state disaster housing program?
Oh, you can rent from any landlord. Our list is just a list that we help to compile, so survivors know that these landlords are willing to offer their property. But you can rent from anyone who is offering a unit.
Okay, thank you. Next question is for Mana, and it says, if you're not allowing landlords to evict for non-payment, what protections are afforded to homeowners who will default on loans without payment?
My colleagues at the Division of Financial Institutions regulate the mortgage servicers operating in Hawaii. My understanding is that they are trying to gather the 10 largest mortgage servicers who service loans in Hawaii for a pop-up event on Maui. So I think your best source of information is going to be your mortgage servicer and the Division of Financial Institutions, which is a division within the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs. This question, as I understand it, is geared towards loan payments, mortgage loan payments that have to be made by homeowners.
Okay, thank you. And the next question for you, Mana, is, does the August 19th proclamation prevent the execution of a writ of possession already issued by a court prior to the emergency?
Yes.
Okay. And another question for you is, do I have to return a tenant's security deposit and rent on a unit that burnt down?
That's a question that our offices have seen come in. Our specialists, again, have dealt with that. I would encourage this person to reach out directly. And if we can get contact information, perhaps we could reach out. But I would just say that our call center is ready to take questions like this. And that's what I would encourage the asker to do, is to contact them.
Thank you. And another question for you, Mana, is many rentals that seem to be very high, one bedrooms for $3,000, for example, in both Lahaina and Kihei, seem to reflect FEMA's assistance amount of the same amount. How can potential new renters find out that rental was renting for previously and then turn a homeowner in for breach of the proclamation or rent hikes?
Well, this is interesting because it seems like the person asking the question wants to do some investigative legwork, and certainly that would help us to determine if there has been some violation of the prohibition on rent increases. Typically, the first avenue is just to ask either the homeowner or the listing service that listed the property what the last rental price was for the unit. And I saw a related question, Lacey. I was trying to locate that. Well, if we get there, we can address it when we get there.
Okay, sounds good. The next question is, for homeowners who have provided their short-term rentals to house displaced residents, what steps will they need to take if displaced residents do not leave or refuse to leave at the end of their short-term stay?
So this question depends on whether this lease or this short-term rental arrangement is subject to the landlord-tenant code. If it is, then the typical protections that are available to tenants would apply. They have not been suspended. So your landlord would have to give notice, appropriate notice, to the tenant to vacate the property. However, as we've said, if this is a tenancy situation where the tenant cannot pay rent because of, for example, they've lost their job, they've had a downturn in their income, and they're not able to make the rent, the emergency proclamation prohibits terminating the tenancy on the basis of failing to pay rent. Terminations can be done in the narrow situations that I outlined, where there's a material breach, where the landlord is moving into the unit, and where the landlord is selling the unit.
Okay, and then another question for you, Mana, is we rented a place not realizing it was a short-term rental. They are charging us Maui County TAT and TAT on top of everything. Is there anything we can do? Is there anything the rental agency can do, or the owner of the condo?
Lacey, I think I can answer that question.
Okay.
Excuse me. The governor and director of finance, Louis Salaveria, are working on specifically the TAT portion of the property rentals, because we know that it's going to be it's going to increase the rate, and we want to keep the rates down so people can stay in longer, and so that homeowners can put their market or their properties on the market. So we are working on that language right now, if we're going to forego the TAT. But at this point, as of today, as we sit right here, we did have the conversation earlier this morning, but as of right now, we have not come up with that solution yet, but that's seriously being considered of foregoing the TAT for West Maui residents.
Okay, and then another question for Director Tokioka. Would you kindly restate the source and timing for applications for the forgivable business loans? Where will the applications be posted?
So as I said, we're working with Maui County right now. We don't have the process set up as we speak. I know when the governor made the announcement of the 12.5 million, we wanted it to go through the Maui Economic Opportunity. I met with Debbie Kabibi yesterday, but the money was sent over to Maui, so we're still in discussions because there were other sources of money from Hawaii Community Foundation that we're looking at as well. So I don't have the date as we speak, but I do know that the money has been sent to Maui, and we're working. We're going to be working with them to finalize how that money will be distributed, as I said earlier. So I did not put out a time frame, and I don't want to be irresponsible and say next week or by the end of this week, and we can't get it done by that time. As I said, there's a lot of considerations for that money. As you can see, if you're a local business owner and we give you the money and you keep it here, and then somebody else who takes the money and moves. And we also want to make it forgivable for the businesses who will rough it out during this time so that they don't get penalized by not being able to apply for other grants or other monies that may be available through the federal government. So we will come up with that information as soon as we know.
Great, thank you. Another question that came in, it says, a lot of people are interested in purchasing tiny homes, but most of us don't have land. Is there a program, or will the government give land to us survivors of the Maui wildfires? Not sure if any of our panelists can address that.
I can. Lacey, thank you. I was in a meeting yesterday with the leadership from Maui in economic development and the office of the mayor. It's all hands on deck. They've been meeting with Dane as well to come up with HHFDC land, with Hawaiian Homes, with everyone, Maui Land and Pine, to come up with solutions for putting some tiny homes on the properties. I know FEMA is working on that too, and part of the FEMA process would be if they put it up, then when they leave, when FEMA leaves, Maui County and the state will be able to keep those homes. So it is it is in the process of working with landowners right now, and Maui County is working hard at that. I was in discussions with them yesterday. I will also say that Maui County has developed a great website for information to be distributed amongst the people on Maui, and it's called mauirecovery.org. And I would suggest people go to that website for information, because you're going to get it straight from Maui. And it's my understanding that it changes rapidly. And as soon as they get information, additional information or new information, they put it onto the website. So that's a big resource, I think, for people who have questions that are on this call.
Okay, thank you so much. Another question is, under the current emergency proclamation, can tenants be required to vacate at the end of a fixed term lease? On ongoing month-to-month leases, may the landlord end the lease and require tenants to vacate with 45 days notice?
Yeah,
Lacey, I can take that one. Under the relevant statute, the statute does not require landlords to extend a fixed term lease, provided that they do give notice to the tenant at the expiration of the lease period.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, how do you go about getting a rental with ESA pets? Many places do not even want to accept pets, and then avoid once you state you have an ESA.
I'm not sure what the answer to that question is. But we can look into the question and get back to the person who asked it.
Lacey, I'll just note that in our inventory, we do have a number of units that will allow pets. I think there's only about 1/4 of the listings that we have allow pets, but that is, about 175 units on our list right now that will allow pets in the unit.
Okay, thank you.
Lacey,
Oh, yeah,
Lacey,
go
can I
ahead.
add to the Hawaii Fire Relief Rental Program? People have commented to me as to why HHFDC and DBED are renting rooms or getting inventory that's not on Maui. And I will say that many people that have lost everything on Maui wanted to open it up to come to Oahu, but with the goal that they will be moving back to Maui when they can rebuild their homes and rebuild their lives. So some people had commented to us, why would you do that? Because they need help now. So as Dean said earlier, people have been relocating to Oahu, Hawaii Island, and Kauai, but they're all staying in the state of Hawaii. And a lot of people were in the service industry, whether it was restaurant, retail, and they want to get back to work. So there's been a worker shortage throughout the state of Hawaii, and we all know that. Many of our favorite restaurants and shops are open only 6 days a week when they used to be open 7. And so, if us allowing people to, or having people move to the different islands and help the workforce there, we think it's a good thing. But I just wanted to share that is not a mandatory thing. It's a choice that the individual family or the person would make. So I just wanted to share that with people who had the wrong impression of what the neighbor island relocation was about.
Okay, thank you so much. The language for the sale exemption of eviction says upon the sale of the unit, does this mean when the property has an actual change of owner on that date when the deed is registered?
Lacey, I think this question is probably directed towards me, but it is the type of question that's seeking a legal opinion that we can't directly answer from the statute. If you are interested, if you've got questions about whether what you're doing is permitted or not, I would encourage you for this particular type of question to consult with your own attorney. That said, I think the question had to do with when you can move back in to when you can terminate a tenancy if the landlord intends to move into the property. It's an area that we've dealt with that is frankly a little bit unclear, and we are struggling with it as well as other people.
Okay, and then a comment we received is, as a tenant, I've been unable to secure a new lease because landlords are worried about tenants skipping out on rent. What can I tell the landlords to make them more comfortable? This person has a good credit score with excellent references and rental history. Please have something edited in the proclamation to be for leases signed after the fires. So if anyone could comment on that.
Yeah, look, I guess we can all sort of understand the tension because there's a housing crunch, having just lost over 2,000 residential units on Maui. And we want existing landlords to open their homes and open their hearts to have people come into their homes who have been displaced. But at the same time, the governor has wanted to stabilize rents in recognition of the economic uncertainties that people are facing. What I would say to this particular individual is that there are remedies still out there for landlords who are dealing with tenants who engage in misconduct. The courtroom is not closed. If a tenant damages property, if a tenant commits a violation of the house rule or commits a crime, anything that would arise to the level of material breach other than a non-payment of rent. So if this renter has an excellent credit history, excellent references, I think they can make assurances to the landlord that they will be providing their rent. And frankly, it's an issue that we can make some policy recommendations on and see what happens. I intend to take these types of issues back to Director Ando at the DCCCA for her input and insight.
Okay, thank you. The next question says, the female representative made reference to fair market rent in a Maui County Council committee meeting. Is there a site where fair market rent prices for Maui are listed? That might be for Director Tokioka.
I'm not sure if there's a site, but I think we can get back to the person who asked that question, Lacey. And we'll track that information down. So I see one question on here that I'd like to answer, and it's from anonymous attendee. Can there be an emergency restriction of short-term vacation rentals in designated West Maui complexes that were original workforce housing anyway? This would be good to keep displaced residents in their community. I'm not going to read the entire question. I'm just going to answer it. Since 3 weeks ago, I've had discussions with the Attorney General specifically about restricting short-term vacation rentals, because what we're trying to do now, as we said earlier today and in the previous webinar, is we're trying to take shelter survivors from the hotels and move them into a more comfortable setting where they have a kitchen, a parking space, and more common to their home living. So we're trying to work with vacation rentals. We're trying to work with hotels. We're trying to work with Airbnbs and the likes to accommodate the survivors that way. It's not easy because a lot of these places were making a lot of money when Maui was, busting at the seams with reservations. But what these companies need to understand is that the reservations, from everything we've been told and everything we've heard and all the data that we gather from the airlines, is the reservations are not bursting at the seams to go back to Maui. It's up a little bit, but it's down dramatically. So we want to work with these companies, these vacation rentals, these owners of units, and we need as many as we possibly can to get into the program. But if we cannot find accommodations for our people, your people that live on Maui and West Maui, then the governor may have that option. And the Attorney General, they did it for a short time on Kauai when the floods were in place, that, they put a ban on short-term rentals in the Honolulu area. And, I personally feel, this is not the Attorney General's answer, that we can do that. But that is the last resort. We don't want to do that because it's going to impact way more people than we want to impact. But the bottom line is the governor and DBEDT and all of the agencies that work for the state government, and I'm assuming the county and the federal government too, want to see us take care of the survivors. And if we need to do that, it's my opinion that we can do that. And we may have to. So thank you for the person who sent that question in.
Okay, thank you. So I think at this point we've answered all of the questions that have come in that apply to our speakers today. While we give it another couple of minutes for other questions to come in, I did want to note that if you have unoccupied rooms, units, or houses that may be able to house those displaced by the fires, or you would like more information about the Hawaii Fire Relief Housing Program, you can go to the website for the program. It's at DBED, that's dbed.hawaii.gov/HHFDC. And there you can find a link to the Hawaii Fire Relief Housing Program for more information. And with that, I think we've answered, again, the questions related to our topic today. So I would like to say mahalo for joining us today. We have all of your questions captured in case we weren't able to get to your question, including those that may have been on other topics. So we'll be putting the answers on our website for this webinar series. That's at dbed.hawaii.gov/pathways to recovery. Again, that's dbed.hawaii.gov/pathways to recovery. And we'll also have the recording posted there as well. With that, and I'll turn it over to Director Tokioka if he has any closing words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lacey, Mana, Dean, and Deputy Director Wicker. As we said earlier, the best tool we have is communication. So if there are other questions for other departments, we want to thank DCCA and Mana Moriarty for coming in to answer questions today. But we can utilize this tool and this forum to answer other questions that the folks on Maui that are going through this have to ask. And so email those questions in, and then we'll look at them and see if we can invite other departments in to answer those questions. We are going to continue this for as long as we possibly can, and for as long as you folks want information, because that's what this forum is all about. So thank you again, everyone, for being on, and we hope to see you in the near future. And we hope to be able to answer the questions that weren't answered here offline, and we look forward to the next meeting. Aloha and mahalo.